Today we look at Ezra 3, 4, and 5. And yesterday as I was introducing Ezra, talked about how long it took, it was 100 and some years to rebuild the temple and all of that in Jerusalem. Well, we find out a little bit about that today and how that process was so slow. But to begin with, in chapter 3, worship is restored at Jerusalem. And in the seventh month had come, it says the children of Israel were gathered together in their cities, but they came together in Jerusalem to observe the festival of booths, basically, or the Feast of the Tabernacles. I'm talking about the wrong one, where I have a hard time differentiating between the Festival of the Booths and the Feast of the Tabernacle. Passover, I know that one. But anyway, they gather together and they offer, the burnt offerings and everything that they're supposed to, according to the book of the law that they have. And then, so that was in the seventh month of the first year. And then as we get into verse 8, the second month of the second year, they begin rebuilding the temple, the house of God. And it says, that there were, in verse 12, many of the priests and Levites, old men who had seen the first temple, wept. So, this temple had been 70 years since so some of these older men and, the older people that remembered, they were getting probably up there in years, because they've been gone for 70 years. And so they were, had to have been 90 and plus years old to remember the old temple. And the beginning of the reconstruction moved them to tears. It was a big deal. And I remember as a child when I was growing up, when they began building the new church in McHenry, Our Savior's Lutheran, and everything that happened. As the hole was dug for the basement and the building, the walls went up and the rafters were placed, and all of the work and how it was done, and then the day that we moved from the old church to the new church, as during a part of a worship service, the emotional attachment there was, to the old building, plus then the excitement of the new building, and for these people that had seen the old temple, and to now be witnessing the beginning of the reconstruction of the new temple, would definitely be a moving moment. I totally can understand that. They sang responsive praises to God, for he is good and his mercy endures toward Israel forever. And it's just that reminder that, to themselves, that, God had chosen them, Israel, to be his people. And his mercy, was still there. And even though, the people had been unfaithful and all of this, they realized why they had been dispersed, why they had been taken captive, because of the lack of following God. And, trouble is that they didn't completely learn and completely change from that. But they were beginning here as they began to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. Chapter 4, the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that they were starting to rebuild the temple of the Lord. So I think this is an interesting way it starts out, because the adversaries found out that they're starting to build. So they come, and it says, let us build with you, for we seek your God as you do, and we have sacrificed to him since the early days of this King Ershon of Assyria, who brought us here. So these foreigners, the people that are living here in Israel now, they know who the Israelite God is, and they've been worshiping and sacrificing to him, and they come and they ask, can we help build? And the Jews blow it, I think, because, no, they say, you may do nothing with us to build a house for our God. We will build it alone, boom, because King Cyrus of Persia gave us permission, and, well, they say, has commanded us, and I guess, in what King Cyrus decreed, it was, return home and build your temple. So it was, I can understand how that's a command, but to refuse to help just doesn't seem right to me. And especially because then the people of the land began to discourage the people of Judah from building it. they get, making it harder and causing problems for them rather than assisting. Then they were detrimental. And verse 6, says, in the beginning they wrote an accusation against them, and that this shouldn't be happening. That these Jews are rebellious and they cause problems, and what they say about the Jews, is just they have been a rebellious people all along. Why do we want them in our area? And it just to the copy of the letter. It's interesting. It says, "Let it be known to the king that the Jews who came are building the rebellious and evil city." They're rebuilding that rebellious and evil city, and they're finishing its walls and repairing its foundations. So let it be known to the king that, when this gets done, they're not going to pay tribute to the king. They're going to be rebellious. They're not going to pay taxes or tribute or custom. The king's treasury will be diminished. Now because we received, and it was just, putting them down, writing and telling a very negative picture of the Jewish people. "We inform the king that if this city is built and its walls are complete, the result it will be that you will have no dominion." You will have no dominion. They're going to revolt against you. They're not going to respect you. And so the king sends an answer, and it says peace and so forth. So that to me means that they just kind of left a little bit out, when that's what's written in my Bible anyway. And he says, "The letter you have sent me has been read clearly before me, and I give the command, and the search has been made, and it has been found that this city indeed has revolted against kings in the past and everything. So now give the command to make them cease, that this city may not be built." So here, this different king comes in and says, we gotta put an end to this. And so, and all of that comes to be. So then read chapter 5, the prophets Haggai and Zechariah come and prophesy, and we got to start getting this building again. And under King Artaxerxes, then things do begin to be rebuilt. And they send a letter to the governor of the region, and this letter, it's to Darius the king. Well, King Cyrus was the one who made the decree, and King Darius came after him. And, so that was, in a part of the introduction, I talked about those two different kings. And but it's the continual problem, the continual resistance to moving forward, especially for the Jewish people. And it's to Darius the king, all peace. It's we're not trying to cause trouble. We want to rebuild our land. We want to do as King Cyrus told us, commanded us, gave us authorization to. And the chapter 5 ends with the paragraph, "Now therefore, if it seems good to the king, let a search be made in the king's treasury, which is in Babylon, to find out if this is right." Because, within this, they say, well, King Cyrus, he even gave us all of the fixtures and all of the gold bowls and all of the elements for our sanctuary, for our temple, that had been confiscated, taken as plunder. He gave them all back to us. So if we don't build a house, we don't have a place for all of that. And so they're trying to be faithful to their God. They're trying to rebuild the temple, the city of Jerusalem, the walls around it, trying to build a safe place for them to live, trying to reclaim the promised land that God had given to them, trying to figure out who they are, not only for themselves, but who they are as children of God. And so the rebuilding process of all of that, meeting the resistance, and I think about in today's world. I read about churches in Minneapolis, St. Paul area that meet every Sunday morning with protesters around and protesting Christianity. I think about the Christians in Ethiopia being, killed because of their faith, and other Christians around the world being persecuted because of their faith. And and this is, so these early Christians that are returning to Jerusalem are being somewhat persecuted for trying to rebuild the temple because of what, fear of God, because of the fear of who they might be. I mean, but all of those things come into being. And so, the people of God we still have to stick together. We still have to come together and fight the ways of Satan in the world, because Satan definitely is trying to do anything and everything in his power to come between the people and God himself. And so the battles that we see going on and the struggles that we see, it isn't just because the people aren't able to follow God, but they have leaders. They had bad kings. I mean, and why were the kings bad? Because of the temptations of Satan. So we need to we just need to be aware of how powerful Satan is and how much influence Satan still has in the world, and so much of the world is turning against not only God but the people of God. And that's a sad, sad fact. It's, to be the people of God is what, of course, God would have us, and he would have us know his laws and uphold his laws and live according to them. But the ways of the world are a struggle, and we see that in and through the Bible all the time.